What good is regretting it now? This is the path I have traveled to get what I wanted. If I apologize, if I repent, everything will come to an end. I'll never get to reach that place. That's Griffith, standing at the edge of everything, about to make a decision that will cost him every person who ever loved him. And that's his reasoning. It's not rage or madness, not the speech of a man who stopped caring. It's the speech of a man who cared so much about the destination that he stopped being able to see what the journey was costing. I want to ask you something before we go any further. Have you ever run that calculation? Not out loud or consciously, but in the quiet justification you rehearsed at 2 in the morning, when everything was working against you, and stopping felt like admitting it all meant nothing, when the hole was getting deeper instead of shallower, and the only logic that made sense was to keep going, because stopping would mean everything you already gave was wasted. I've run that calculation more than once, and the cost didn't show up where I expected, because it never does. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, and this is the story of Griffith. Before we talk about what Griffith became, we need to spend some time with who he was, because if you come to this story knowing only the Eclipse, you'll misread the whole thing. You'll see a villain making a villain's choice, and that's not what happened. Griffith wasn't born with power. He wasn't born with nobility. He wasn't giving anything. He grew up in a cobblestone back alley of a city that had already decided he didn't matter. Poverty-stricken, often unable to get even a slice of bread, playing in the streets with other children, collecting junk trinkets and treating them like small victories. But even then, even in those alleys, Griffith would look up, past the brothels and pubs that blocked the sunlight, past the noise and indifference and the poverty, and fix his eyes on a sun-coated castle in the distance. It wasn't a fantasy, it was a destination. And that distinction matters, because a fantasy is something you dream about. A destination is something you move toward, and Griffith moved. From the moment he formed the band of the Falcon, from the moment he began gathering people around him, something unusual happened. They came freely. That's the part most people miss when they talk about Griffin. He wasn't manipulating people into following him. He wasn't calculating their usefulness and positioning them accordingly. At least not yet. In the Golden Age, people chose him. Casca, Judea, Pippin, Corcus, people from completely different walks of life, drawn together by something they couldn't fully articulate, but couldn't ignore. Judea put it simply, the ones who follow Griffith believe that staying close to him means they'll get to see something great. And they're not wrong, at least not yet. It wasn't manipulation, he's inspiring, and there's a difference. Manipulation uses people, inspiration invites people, and in the beginning, Griffith genuinely invited them. He expressed regret when they died. He sold his body to ensure their survival. He risked his life repeatedly for individual members of his band, not because it was strategic, but because he cared. That's the part of Griffith that makes this story so difficult, because he wasn't pretending. The compassion was real, the loyalty was real, the community he built was real. In the middle of all of that, there was Guts. Now, if you don't know Berserk, Guts is a mercenary, a massive, brutal, incredible fighter, someone who shouldn't have fit inside the band of the Falcon at all. Not yet. And yet, Griffith encounters tens of thousands of allies and enemies across his story, and Guts is the one person who most consistently makes him forget the dream. Not because Guts is the most powerful, not because he's the most loyal, but because for the first time in his life, Griffith encounters something he can't fully categorize, can't fully manage, can't reduce to a piece on the board. Guts makes him feel something that disrupts the calculation, and Griffith, who has an answer for everything, doesn't have an answer for that. He tells Guts things he's never told anyone, his real thoughts about what it means to be extraordinary, what it means to carry a dream, what he actually believes about the world. And in those conversations, Griffith isn't the White Falcon. He isn't a leader or a strategist or a symbol. He's just a person talking to another person. That was real. I want to stay in that for a moment, because we're going to spend a lot of time this episode watching what Griffith destroyed, and I want you to understand what it actually was before we watch it burn. It wasn't a kingdom, and it wasn't power, it wasn't even the dream. It was this. The thing you can't fake. The thing that shows up unexpectedly and refuses to be categorized. The thing that makes you feel like a person instead of a function. I had a version of that. When I opened Handsome Comics in 2020, the thing I didn't anticipate wasn't the orders or the channel or the growth. It was the community. The people who found the shop and stayed, who talked comics with me like it mattered, who made the whole thing feel like something more than a business, that it was real. And I want to name it as real before I talk about what the cost of chasing it eventually becomes, because the shop wasn't just a failed business, It was something that had genuine life in it, and the mistake I made wasn't wanting that. The mistake was in how far I was willing to go to sustain it, which is exactly where Griffith's story is heading. Because here's what nobody talks about when they talk about Griffith. He didn't fall because he was necessarily a bad person. He fell because he was just a person who had a flaw buried so deep inside his strength that he never saw it coming until it was already too late. The flaw wasn't the dream. The flaw was in not determining what that dream was allowed to cost. He never answered that question, not once. And in all those years of building something real, in all those conversations with Guts, in all those moments of genuine connection and care, Griffith never asked himself what the dream was not allowed to cost. And that silence is what everything else grows from. Here's what makes Griffith so difficult to categorize. He genuinely cared about the people around him, and he managed them simultaneously. Both things were true at the same time, and most people, when they try to understand Griffith, pick one of those things and build their reading around it. Either he was a manipulator who performed caring, or he was a genuinely good person who made one catastrophic choice. But the truth is harder than either of those, because caring and managing aren't mutually exclusive, and the most dangerous leaders in history are almost never the ones who don't care. They're the ones who care deeply, and still treat people as a means to an end. Not because they're lying about the care, because they never asked the question that would force them to choose. Griffith never asked that question, so watch what he does. While his men are fighting and dying for a dream they freely choose, Griffith is attending Charlotte's dinner party, charming the nobility, positioning himself politically, and simultaneously, he has commissioned Guts to quietly assassinate General Julius, a political enemy. The man is at a dinner party, while the person he considers so close to him is committing a murder on his behalf. And Griffith experiences no apparent conflict about this, not because he doesn't care about Guts, but because in his mind, the dream he has justifies the deployment. Then there's Minister Foss. Griffith identifies Foss as a political threat, and his solution is elegant and merciless. He abducts Foss's daughter, uses her as leverage to gain the minister's compliance, forces him to gather all of Griffith's enemies in one place, and then he burns them alive. And afterward, he returns the daughter unharmed. He expresses hope for friendlier relations in the future, as if the abduction was simply a business transaction. And now, here's what I want you to notice. Griffith isn't cruel about any of this. It's a monstrous act, but he isn't enjoying the suffering. He even questions himself afterward, asks Guts if he's a cruel person, and that question matters. Because cruel people usually don't ask it. Griffith does. And then he does it anyway. Because the question was never meant to stop him. It was meant to be answered by Guts, which tells you something important about what Griffith was doing with that friendship. He was using Guts as his conscience, as the mirror that told him he was still human, as the one relationship that made the calculation feel bearable. And that's a terrible thing to do to someone you care about, because really, you're using them to feel okay about who you're becoming. Griffith describes his definition of a true friend at one point. He says a true friend is someone with their own dream, someone with an ambition of their own, an equal. And by his own definition, almost no one in the band of the Falcon qualifies, because they're following his dream, not their own. Which means no matter how much he cares about them, no matter how real the grief is when they die, and the architecture of his thinking, they are beneath him. They are a means, not an end, and he never names that, never confronts it, just carries the grief and the calculation simultaneously, keeps moving forward, until Guts leaves. Guts, the one person who qualified, the one person with his own dream, his own direction, his own reason to exist that had nothing to do with Griffith's destination, the one real equal, decides to leave. Not in anger or for betrayal, because he has his own path to walk, and that decision breaks Griffith completely. Not strategically, not as a setback, at the level of identity, because Guts wasn't just a friend. Guts was the proof that Griffith was still human, and when he leaves, there's nothing underneath. No foundation, no self that exists apart from the dream, just the dream, and the dream can't hold the weight of a person. So Griffith does something completely out of character. He abandons logical reasoning entirely. He seeks out Charlotte, the princess, and crosses a line he cannot uncross, and is arrested the following morning. And what follows a year of suffering so severe it defies description. Broken down piece by piece, a year of darkness, a year of complete isolation, and in that darkness, two things sustain him: his dream and thoughts of Guts. Both simultaneously. Even in the worst suffering of his life, Griffith can't separate the dream from the person who made him forget it. That tells you everything about what the dream actually was. It wasn't just ambition. It was the container for everything he couldn't fully express any other way. The kingdom wasn't just the destination. It was the shape his love took, because he didn't know how to love without a mission attached. While I've never sat in a torture chamber, I've sat in something quieter. Because when the shop started declining, when the sales dropped and the margins tightened and the hole got deeper, I didn't stop. I didn't step back and ask what this was costing. I just kept going, plowing forward, not because I didn't care about my family, because stopping felt like admitting it all meant nothing. And there's something else I need to say here, something I haven't said on the channel before, because during that season, the people at home were experiencing my absence. Not my intention, my absence. And I told myself I was doing it for them, that the sacrifice was temporary, that the present's debt will be repaid later. But present's debt doesn't work like financial debt. You can't repay it afterwards. The nights you weren't there are nights that are already gone. The conversations that didn't happen just didn't happen. And the version of me that was always somewhere else mentally was the version they were actually living with, not the version I believed I was. The actual version. And I kept going anyway, because stopping would mean everything I already gave meant nothing. It's logic that sounds almost noble until you trace where it leads. Griffith traced it all the way to the Eclipse. Most of us trace it somewhere smaller, but the structure's identical, and the cost always arrives in the same place. Not in the dream, in the people who were there while the dream consumed you. They didn't experience your intention, they experienced your presence, or the absence of it. I want to walk through this slowly, because the Eclipse is the moment everything lands, and if we rush it, we'll miss what it actually is, which is not a villain's choice, it's a builder's trap, sprung at the worst possible moment, on the worst possible version of the man. When Guts and the others rescue Griffith from the Tower of Rebirth, they don't find the White Falcon. They found something the year of suffering produced. A man who cannot hold a sword, cannot speak, cannot walk without help, cannot do the one thing that gave his life meaning, or the one thing that made him feel human. Everything is gone. The dream feels impossible. The friendships that sustained him is present but complicated, because Guts left. Guts came back to rescue him, but Guts left. And those two facts exist simultaneously in Griffith's broken mind. He doesn't know what to do with either of them. So one night, while the others sleep, Griffith commandeers a horse carriage, pursues a vision of the castle from his dream, and crashes into a lake. And for a moment, suspended in the air before he hits the water, he sees something. A vision of a quieter life, Casca beside him, a child, a simple existence, something human, something that had nothing to do with his destination. Then he hits the water. And the Behair, the crimson artifact that has been with him since childhood, surfaces from the lake bed, and the Eclipse begins. Now I want to stay here for a moment before we go inside, because that vision matters. The life he glimpsed, the simple human thing, it was a possibility. Not easily or without cost, but it could have been available, and he saw it. In the Behair it surfaced anyway, and he let it. Because the dream was louder. Inside the Eclipse, Griffith is presented with the terms. The God Hand, beings of immense cosmic power, revealed that his ascension into their ranks has been preordained, that everything he has experienced, every battle, every sacrifice, every loss, has been moving towards this moment, and what the moment requires is a sacrifice. The Band of the Falcon. Everyone who followed him freely, everyone who loved him, everyone who believed in the dream because they believed in him, offered up, so that Griffith can become something beyond human. And here's where most storytellers would show a man wrestling with an impossible choice. Here's where most stories would give the character a moment of genuine moral anguish. But Berserk doesn't do that, because Griffith doesn't wrestle, he reasons. He's taken to a vision of his own conscious self, reminded of the dream, shown the mound of corpses of those who died for it, and he looks at those graves, and concludes that stopping now would mean those deaths were in vain, that their sacrifice would be meaningless, that everything he built in their graves would amount to nothing. And so he reasons that he has effectively made this sacrifice many times before. Every soldier who died in his campaigns, every life spent in service of the destination, he's already been doing this. The Eclipse is just the final version of what he has always done. It's logical in his mind, and I want you to sit inside it for a moment, because it almost makes sense. Not morally, God no, but emotionally. It has the shape of responsibility, the shape of honoring the dead, the shape of commitment to something larger than yourself. If I stop now, everything they gave means nothing. If I stop now, all the sacrifice was wasted. And if I stop now, I'm saying the dream, the destination, nothing was ever real. Have you ever run into that? Not about an eclipse, not about anything this enormous, but in the small daily versions of it. Every time you deferred presence for progress, every time you told yourself just a little bit longer, every time stopping felt like betrayal of everything you'd already given. It's the same logic, the same shape, the same trap, and Griffith walked straight into it, because he never asked the question that would have interrupted it. What is the dream not allowed to cost? He never answered that. So when the moment came, there was no limit already in place, no line already drawn, no answer waiting that would stop the calculation, just the logic running on a loop and a broken man who already lost the one person who made him feel human. And in his last moment of humanity, Griffith acknowledges something devastating. Guts was the only one who had ever made him forget the dream. The only one. And he says it. Then he says the other thing. I sacrifice. And the band of the Falcon is marked. And the dream continues, at the cost of every person who ever loved him freely. Matthew 16:26 says, "What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul?" Griffith gains everything he ever wanted. The kingdom, the power, the destiny preordained since childhood. He reaches the castle he stared at from those back alleys, and he arrives there alone, having spent every person who ever made the journey feel worth taking. The dream fulfilled, the dreamer empty. I want to be very careful about what I share here, because I've never went this in depth in my own personal life. So here it is. There was a season where I understood that logic from the inside, not from the Eclipse, not from anything that dramatic or horrible, but the small daily version of it. The hole getting deeper, the sales declining, the financial pressure building, the time disappearing, and every morning waking up and running the same calculation. If I stop now, everything I already gave means nothing. If I stop now, the sacrifice was wasted, and if I stop now, I'm saying it was never real. Underneath all of that, something I haven't said publicly before, during the worst of it, my faith was absent. It wasn't strained or tested. No, I mean it was absent. I set it aside because survival felt more urgent than surrender, because asking God for help felt slower than just working harder, because the hole was deep enough that I couldn't see anything from the bottom of it, including the people I told myself I was building it for. I'm not proud of that season, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, because if this episode is going to be worth anything, it has to be honest about the place where Griffith's logic became recognizable. Not because you made his choice, but because you felt the pull of it, and the pull is real, and it deserves to be named, before we talk about what breaks through anyway. After the Eclipse, Griffith becomes Femto, a member of the God Hand, a being of immense astral power, devoid of humanity, retaining his memories, his ambition, his ego, but stripped of the things that made him human. The grief, the longing, the love that couldn't be categorized. All of it, supposedly gone. And for a while, it appears that way. Femto moves through the world with a cold precision that Griffith never quite achieved. No hesitation or self-questioning, no moment of asking whether he is cruel, just a dream, pursued without friction, without cost, without the inconvenience of feeling. And then the full moon rises, and something happens that the God Hand didn't account for. Femto transforms, not into something more powerful, into a child, the Moonlight Boy, a small, silent, wandering child, who seeks out the people Griffith sacrificed, who finds Guts, who finds Casca, who sits with them, who carries in his small frame everything Femto claimed to have left behind. Longing, tenderness, the ache of someone who remembers what was lost, even when the part of him that remembers has been buried under layers of power and ambition and cosmic transformation. And every full moon, it comes back, without being summoned, without permission, without Griffith choosing it, it just arrives. Because it was never fully gone. Griffith insists that the whatever the child feels vanishes when the full moon ends. He tries to make it small, manageable, a temporary glitch in an otherwise clean system, but it keeps coming back. Every month, the same longing, the same seeking, the same child, finding the people the man sacrificed, and sitting with them in the dark. Because you cannot bury what God placed in you, not completely, and not permanently, not even if you become something inhuman in the process of trying. The humanity doesn't disappear, it waits, goes underneath, it waits, and it surfaces, on its own schedule, in its own way, looking for the people and the things it was separated from. And I want to sit in that for a moment. The fact that even at his most inhumane, even stripped of everything that made him a person, something keeps breaking through, something that can't be fully eliminated, something that remembers. And I think that's true of men in a way we don't talk about enough. Because a lot of men spend years suppressing things, not because they don't feel them, but because the dream doesn't have room for them. The father gets suppressed because the mission needs focus. The husband gets suppressed because the pressure needs management. The faithful man gets suppressed because survival feels more urgent than surrender. And suppression works, at least for a while. You can run on discipline and momentum and the logic of the sunk cost for longer than you'd expect. But it comes back. It always comes back. In the quiet moments, in the 3 a.m. moments, in the moments when the noise stops and something underneath starts asking questions you haven't been answering. Because it was never gone. It was just waiting. I told you in the previous chapter that my faith was absent during that season, and I meant it. I set it aside deliberately, choosing the grind over the surrender, choosing the calculation over the conversation, and for a while it felt like the right trade. Like faith was a luxury I couldn't afford while the hole was this deep. Like God could wait while I figured this out. But here's what I didn't expect. God didn't wait. Not in a dramatic way, or not in a voice from the sky, or a single transformative moment. In the small, persistent way that grace actually works. It just keeps showing up. In the exhaustion that finally got quiet enough to hear something. In the moment I looked at my daughter and understood that I was becoming someone she would remember but not know. In the realization, not dramatic, just heavy, that the hole I was in had a bottom. And the bottom wasn't where I expected. It wasn't failure. It wasn't the business closing. It wasn't the moment I finally stopped moving long enough to feel how alone I had made myself. And something met me there. Not because I earned it. Not because I had done anything to deserve it. Just because that's how grace works. It doesn't wait for worthiness. It just keeps showing up. Lamentations verse 3:22-23 says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning." New every morning. Not because the morning deserves it. Not because you woke up better than you went to sleep. Just new. That's the nature of the one offering it. The Moonlight Boy shows up every full moon, whether Griffith chooses it or not. Whether Femto believes it or not. Whether the dream has room for it or not. It just comes. Because the humanity placed inside of Griffith was never Griffith's to fully eliminate, and the grace placed inside your life was never yours to fully outrun, even when you tried, even when you thought you had, even in the worst of the absence. It was still there, waiting for the noise to get quiet enough, for you to get still enough, for the full moon to rise, and for the part of you that was buried under the dream to finally find its way back to the surface. It's a lived experience, and if you felt it, if you felt something breaking through in those quiet moments, something that refuses to stay buried no matter how deep the hole gets, it's not weakness. It's the most important thing about you. So don't suppress it, don't manage it, don't file it away and go back to that calculation. Let it surface. Because the Moonlight Boy knew exactly where to go. He went to the people who mattered most. And that instinct, that persistent returning to what actually matters, is the truest thing Griffith had left. And it's the truest thing you have too. I want to talk directly to you for a minute. Not about Griffith, but about you. Because everything we've covered in this episode, the dream, the cost, the logic that sounds almost noble, the humanity that keeps breaking through anyway, none of it stays in the story. It follows you home, and I know it follows you home because it followed me home. I know it's following you home right now because you're still listening, which means something in this episode recognized you, not as a villain, but as a builder, as someone with a real dream and real people and a question you haven't fully answered yet. What is the dream not allowed to cost? I want to ask you something specific. When did you last give someone your full presence? Not your physical presence, not your body in the room, but your actual attention, your mind. You're being fully there without the calculation running in the background. Because for a lot of men, me included, especially men in the middle of building something, full presence is the rarest thing they have to offer. And it goes to the dream first, the family gets what's left, which is usually not much. And the tragedy is that most of these men love their families deeply. They're not Griffith sacrificing people for power. They're men who genuinely believe the dream is for the people they love, that the sacrifice is temporary, that the present's debt will be repaid when the destination is reached. But the destination keeps moving, and the people at home aren't experiencing your intentions, they're experiencing your presence, or the absence of it. I think about the man listening to this at 2 a.m., giving his newborn a bottle, running on empty, trying to figure out how to be a father and a provider and a builder all at once. And underneath all of it, quietly, the Eclipse logic is available. Not the terrifying cosmic version, the daily one. Just a little longer. Just one more push. Just get through this season and then I'll be present. Just close this gap and then I'll show up fully. Just reach the destination and the people will benefit from everything I give. The logic feels responsible. It feels like commitment. It feels like the right thing for a man carrying real weight to do. But trace it forward, 10 years from now, 20, and ask yourself what your children will remember. Not what you intended, not what you were building towards, not the destination you were trying to reach for them, what they will actually remember. Because children don't inherit your intentions, they inherit your patterns. And the pattern you're running right now is the one they're learning from. Griffith's people didn't experience his dream, they experienced his presence, or the absence of it. And when the moment came, when life finally asked which one wins, there was no limit already in place, no answer waiting that could interrupt the logic, no line already drawn, because he never drew it. And the eclipse happened in the space where the limit should have been. Your version of that moment is being built right now, not in a single dramatic decision, in the accumulation of 1,000 small ones. Every time you're physically present but mentally elsewhere, every time the notification gets more attention than the person in front of you, every time just a little longer becomes the answer to a question that deserves something different. Those aren't eclipse moments. They're the conditions that make the eclipse possible. James 4:13-14 says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town, and spend a year there and trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. James isn't condemning the plan. He's naming the assumption buried inside of it, that the people in your life will still be there when you arrive, that the present's debt can be repaid later, that the destination is where the real life begins. But the people in your life exist now, not at the destination, now. And the years you're spending getting there are the years they're spending without the full version of you. I'm not saying stop building, and I'm not saying the dream is wrong. I'd be a hypocrite to say that. I'm saying the dream needs a limit. A clear answer to the question Griffith never answered. What is it not allowed to cost? For me, that limit is starting to look like this. The channel gets my best thinking. My family gets my best presents. Not what's left over, not the depleted version that shows up after the work is done. The actual best. And when those two things conflict, family wins. Every time. Not always perfectly, not without a cost, but as a direction, as a decision made in advance, before the moment arrives that makes the calculation feel reasonable. Because Griffith didn't lose to the Eclipse. He lost well before it. And all the years he never answered the question, and all the small daily moments where the dream came first, and the people absorbed the cost, no limit was ever placed. The Eclipse was just the moment the bill came due, and it came due all at once. But there was no installment plan, no limit already in place, no answer waiting that could interrupt the logic, just the dream, and the people it consumed. You still have time to answer that question, not because the dream is wrong, but because the people are real, and they need to know, before that moment arrives, that there is something the dream is not allowed to cost, that the limit exists, that they are on the right side of it, because the man who knows that answer is a different kind of builder than Griffith ever was. He builds towards something without spending the people he loves to get there. He carries the dream without letting it carry him. He reaches the destination and finds the people still there. Not because he sacrificed less, but because he knew what he wasn't allowed to sacrifice. That's the difference, and it's the only difference that will ever matter. Last week we talked about Beast Wars Megatron, and now Griffith. It's the same disease, but a different cost. Megatron spent his whole story trying to control a future that never was his to own, and when it collapsed, he lost a system, a plan, a vision organized according to his design, devastating in its own way, but survivable. Systems can be rebuilt, plans can be revised, visions can be changed. Griffith lost something different. He lost people who loved him freely, who chose him, who followed not because they were managed into it, but because something in them recognized something in him, and said yes. And he spent them, not out of pure cruelty, out of a calculation that had no limit, out of a logic that sounded almost noble, right up until it consumed everything it was supposed to protect. And the difference between those two losses is the difference between this episode and the Beast Wars Megatron video. Megatron's tragedy is intellectual. Griffith's tragedy is personal. That's why Griffith is the harder mirror, because you can watch Megatron and feel the distance of a cartoon villain making a villain's mistake, but you can't watch Griffith and feel that distance. Not if you're honest, because Griffith had what most of us are building towards. Real community, real loyalty, real friendship, real love. He had the thing, and he spent it. And the men listening to this, the men in the middle of building something real, with real people depending on them and real dreams pulling them forward, are closer to Griffith than they like to admit. Not because they're villains. We're not. But because the dream is real, and the people are real, and eventually life will ask which one wins. And the answer given in that moment is who you actually are. I want to leave you with this image I keep coming back to. Not the Eclipse, not the castle and the dream finally realized, but the Moonlight Boy. The child who appears on full moon nights, seeking the people Griffith sacrificed. Finding Guts, finding Casca, sitting with them in the dark, carrying everything the dream said didn't matter anymore. Everything Griffith tried to leave behind. Everything that refused to stay buried, because even at his most inhumane, even stripped of everything that made him a person, the longing outlasted the ambition, the love outlasted the calculation, the humanity outlasted the dream, and I find that, quietly, one of the most hopeful things in this entire story. Not because it redeems Griffith, it doesn't, and I don't think anything really would, but because it tells the truth about what endures. Not the kingdom or the power, not the destination finally reached, the people, the longing for the people, the part of you that knows who matters, even when everything else has been spent. As I record this, I have a newborn who just arrived, and the limit is clearer now than it's ever been, because there's a person coming who will grow up watching what I do with my time, not what I intend, what I actually do, and the pattern I run in front of him is the pattern he'll inherit. I want the practice to be worth inheriting, not perfect, but deliberate, with the things on the right side of the limit, the faith returned, not loudly or dramatically, but as a direction. It's the thing that interrupts the calculation, before it runs all the way to the end. Micah 6:8 says, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. 3 things, simple, unambiguous, the opposite of the Eclipse logic in 6 simple words. Not reach the destination at any cost. Not the dream justifies the sacrifice. Not stopping now means everything was wasted. Just act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Do right by the people in front of you. Extend grace before it's deserved. Hold the dream loosely enough to still see the faces. Griffith couldn't do that. Not in the end. Not when it mattered most. But you're not at the end yet. You're in the middle. In the middle is where the limit gets set. Before the moment arrives. Before the calculation starts running. Before life asks which one wins. Set the limit now. Name what the dream is not allowed to cost. And then build towards the destination. With the people still beside you when you get there. That's a different ending. Not Griffith's ending, but yours. This has been Disassembled Heroes and Villains. Stay deliberate, stay present, stay faithful, and as always, stay handsome.